Congrats on getting beyond 1 million. What got you here won't always get you there. This is a podcast for entrepreneurs who want to reach beyond their 7-figure business and scale to 8, 9, and even 10 figures. I'm Brad Weimert, and as the founder of EasyPay Direct, I have had the privilege to work with more than 30,000 businesses, allowing me to see the data behind what some of the most successful companies on the planet are doing differently. Join me each week as I dig in with experts in sales, marketing, operations, technology, and wealth building. And you'll learn some of the specific tools, tactics, and strategies that are working today in those multi-million, 8, 9, and 10-figure businesses. Life can get exciting beyond 1 million.
Perry Marshall, appreciate you showing up and spending some time with me, man.
It's good to be here with the Mohawk man. Didn't we talk when we last saw each other? Like, you're going to maybe turn your whole company into a bunch of Mohawk merchant account guys. I don't know if you ever decided you'd have to force all your staff to have Mohawks, wouldn't you?
Well, I've been watching The Handmaid's Tale. And so recently I've gotten into this idea of just forcing people to do things at my own will. Not really. That sounds terrible.
Since the world seems to be veering towards fascism anyway, I guess we ought to just get with the program, right?
Yep. Well, Mohawks, or you're not working here.
If the government's going to be fascist, I guess the business owners need to be too.
So yeah, last we saw each other was on a trip with Yannick Silver to Antarctica, and we spent lots of time with penguins who smell very bad.
Yeah, penguins have a special aroma, which doesn't come through in the pictures, which is probably fine. I'm sure television would be a whole different experience if it came with smells.
Oh boy, that's the truth. That's the truth. Well, I had a great time talking to you in Antarctica, and we've crossed paths in the past, but never really gotten a chance to talk or get to know each other. So a little backdrop on you. I think most people know you from 80/20 and marketing in general, but can you give the quick bio on who is Perry Marshall to help those that don't know?
So I'm the guy who was an engineer and got laid off when my wife was pregnant with our first child. And I had to scramble around. I ended up in sales, which was a good 2+ years of bologna sandwiches and ramen soup and spiraling credit card debt and pounding the phone and pounding the pavement and putting miles on my car. And it was kind of miserable. But I then discovered direct marketing. And I discovered that there's not only the backslapping, handshaking sales guys out, beating the bushes out there. There's this another breed of animal called a marketer, and they tend to more sit in their cave and they write stuff and they craft ideas and they come up with concepts. And if you're really good at that, there's a whole lot less bush beating and pavement pounding that's necessary in order to earn a living. And so I started doing about 2/3 marketing, 1/3 sales guy, and that worked a lot better. And in fact, I took a different job and we built and sold that company for $18 million to a public firm, and I got some stock options out of the deal. So I hung out my shingle. And then the next thing that happened that some people would be familiar with was I wrote the book on Google Ads. And that all started in 2002 when Google just barely began to sell advertising. And so I've been through several reinventions. So I got a book on Facebook, got a Google on TikTok book, Google book, 80/20 book, several other things. And we're here to talk about how all the stir fry goes together.
Right, exactly. So it sounds like you have some mild interest in marketing, maybe.
Yeah, I do. And also, people go, wow, okay, electrical engineer, like now you're doing this, like that doesn't make any sense. Actually, it makes perfect sense if you understand that marketing is arithmetic in human psychology, and there's a whole arithmetic part of it. And if you like numbers, and if you like slicing and dicing, there's a whole fascinating side of marketing that a lot of backslapping sales guys wouldn't touch with a barge pole, but it's extremely profitable. In fact, it's what runs the world now, right? Sure. The politicians might be backslapping sales guys, but the propeller heads at Google and Facebook and TikTok are all, they're numbers people. And so whether you roll one way or the other, there's a place for you in the world. And I happen to do both. I like the people stuff, but I also like numbers and charts and fractals and, like all kinds of crazy stuff like that, which is why 80-20 was so fascinating. Like 80-20, it's the arithmetic of chaos theory is what it really is. It's the math of inequality. And what any good marketer does is more than pushing and manipulating the world. What really good marketers do is they harness natural forces. They don't just go get a road grader and make a highway. They start with a sheep trail and they turn it into a sidewalk, which eventually they turn into a road, which eventually they turn into an expressway, if the market keeps liking to go down that path. And so I think a lot of people think that we have to fight the world at every turn, and that's not true. In fact, the best marketers never do that.
Yeah, somebody told me a long time ago that shitty salespeople fight to sell and good salespeople sort.
Yes.
And
yes,
that sort of plays into this idea of marketing, right? As if you market very well, you don't have to be able to sell as well in person if you did the marketing right.
Yes. In fact, in 80-20 sales and marketing, I say that marketing is not a convincing people process. It is a disqualification process. The first thing you do is you figure out, who should I not sell to? And that's very fundamental. Like, this isn't just a parlor trick, and it's not a little piece of psychology that you put on like a shirt. It's a fundamental truth. And so in the book, I describe the 5 power disqualifiers, which my friend John Paul Mendoza came up with. And they are the 5 things that are always true anytime anybody sells anything to anyone. And this is a pretty profound thing if you really think about, okay, so there are 5 things, and if I meet these 5 criteria, I'm probably going to sell something. And if I don't meet all 5, I'm never going to sell any. Yeah, that's right. So number 1 is they have the money. Mm. Guess what? If they don't have the money, no matter how long you hold hands and sing Kumbaya, they're not going to buy it. In fact, what the hold hands in Kumbaya thing usually ends up being is you buy it for them, which is a really terrible way to make money. Like, it's just, you never make money when you buy the stuff with your own money and give it to the customer because you wanted them to have it so bad. The second power disqualifier is they have a bleeding neck. People do not buy things when they're comfortable and happy and satisfied. They buy things when blood is squirting out of their aorta and splattering on the ceiling. Like you go to the emergency room with a broken arm, you will find out that your definition of emergency and their definition of emergency is not the same thing, right? But you're sitting there with a Good Housekeeping magazine in the waiting room, holding your broken arm and filling out a clipboard. And then some guy with a gunshot wound gets drug in there. Like, all of a sudden, all these people appear out of nowhere and they start helping the gunshot wound guy, right? Well, this is what I mean by bleeding neck. The third thing is they buy into your unique selling proposition. Well, if you don't have a unique selling proposition, they're not going to buy into it. And if you have one, but they don't solve the problem that way, they want to solve it some other way, then you're not going to sell something. The fourth one is they have the ability to say yes. I do not know how many sales calls I went on where I was talking to somebody who could say no and they could kick me out the door, but they could not say yes. I'm talking to an engineer and he thinks I got a cool idea, but as soon as I convince him, then I got to go get the engineering manager, and then I got to get the purchasing manager, and then I got to get the vice president, and I would just climb slowly up this ladder. Or like if you're selling kitchen remodeling, if the husband's there and the wife is not, you're not selling a kitchen remodel. And the fourth thing is it fits their overall plans. So all 5 of those things have to be true. Well, if you take that list of 5 things and you ask yourself, well, how am I going to sell this thermos? Well, it actually narrows down. 90% of the people in the world are not going to buy your thermos. So don't even try.
Yeah.
Just stop.
Yeah. So I love those, and we will certainly be highlighting those steps, because I think that those are great things to think about, both from a marketing perspective and from a sales perspective. One of the things that really good outbound sales teams do that I personally hate to be on the other end of, because I find it just to be pedantic and irritating when I know that I want to buy, but they force you into a bucket. And so you look at like the enterprise level software companies, they've got a screener, a business development rep that calls you. They have no authority to sell you anything. They can't even give you pricing most of the time. All they're doing is seeing if you fit the box, seeing if you are a qualified lead for them to then hand off to somebody that can potentially sell you. But it's effective for them.
That's exactly right. And so this was a very interesting thing that you just said, because there are not only buyers who can't buy, but there's salespeople who can't sell. Evidently. Right. and so like you could, if this person calls you up on the phone, you could short circuit the process and just say, hey, listen, I'm ready to buy right now. But if I understand this phone call correctly, you have to check up a bunch of boxes before I get to the top guy that can actually take the purchase order. Am I understanding this correctly? And well, most people aren't asking them that question. It'd probably be very disarming or something. But when you sell through disqualification, there's something else that you can do that's extremely persuasive when you're talking to the right person. So when we wrote our Ultimate Guide to Facebook Advertising book about 10 years ago, at the time, Facebook was only appropriate for maybe 15% of the businesses out there. If you were a coffee shop or a church or a political organization, Facebook was great. If you sold automotive brake pads, Facebook was terrible. And we would say that Google is the yellow pages, Facebook is the coffee shop. And so when we wrote the book, right on page 2 of the book, it said, go to isfbforme.com, which stands for Is Facebook for Me, and take this little quiz and see what score you get. And if you get less than a 6, just see if you can get your money back for this book. And do not do Facebook. If you get a 9, then absolutely like dog ear, underline, circle, post-it note this book and make it your Bible, because that's going to be really important for you. And we made this quiz, and it really did. Lots of people would have got a 4, 5, or a 6, which at best meant, well, Facebook is probably number 6 or 7 on your list of things to do. But it's certainly not number 1. And when your customers can see that you are sending away a steady flow of people who do not fit, and then they show up and you say, you dude, you got a 9.2. You should absolutely do this. In fact, you should figure out how much of my marketing budget can I divert to Facebook, because it's probably going to have double or triple the return on ad spend than you're getting from the newspaper or whatever else is that you're doing. And that is incredibly powerful. And it puts you in a position of not begging anybody to do anything. Hey, we sent those people away. You need to take this seriously. It means that you are matching what you are selling to the marketplace instead of ramming it down anybody's throat. And that makes you much more authoritative. It makes your job much easier. And it's such a better mindset. I can't even tell you. I mean, when I compare what I do now, which is a lot of disqualification compared to the begging and the neediness and the poverty and driving all over the Chicagoland area trying to knock on doors, there's no comparison.
Well, let me ask you, to that extent, that resonates really deeply with me. And it's also very difficult for somebody when they're brand new and starving, right? And trying to grow, to disqualify people that are like maybe a decent fit. They're just not great, right? I could probably sell them this thing, but they're not they're not the avatar. They're not the target market. So how does your approach to marketing, if at all, change in the early days? And if it does change, at what point do you get heavier in disqualification?
It makes the salesperson much more choosy about what they decide to sell. Usually when you're in that situation, it's because you're selling something that nobody wants. Mm-hmm. Okay. Or you're selling something that, yeah, people do want that, but it's a commodity and other people are ahead of you. And now you're duking it out over price and delivery. The biggest problem with my first sales job was that most of what we sold, other companies sold something fairly similar. Any sales I could get came down to price and delivery. And it wasn't because it was a superior product. It wasn't because it was a unique product. And that's difficult sometimes because my situation was I had just got laid off from an engineering job. If I wanted to stay in Chicago, I probably wasn't going to stay in engineering. And so I had to take this flying leap into sales. And now I am looking at selling stuff that I don't even necessarily understand very well, right? Like I didn't know that market. Yeah, I worked at Kellogg's, and Kellogg's was a factory, and we're selling these products to factories. So I know a thing or two about a factory, but I don't really know this market very well. And a lot of people just kind of get thrown into the lake and are expected to swim. Well, if you take the 5 power disqualifiers and you go, well, I'm looking at possibly taking 3 different jobs, you ought to have some rudimentary ability to figure out, do people have the money? Do they have a bleeding neck? How much of a bleeding neck do they have? Like you go walk around in a trade show and start asking questions and at least get some crude answer to some of these questions. 80 or 90% of the sales jobs out there, you shouldn't take unless you're just so absolutely desperately broke that it's the only option. And in the world being the way it is and having as many problems as it has, go solve an actual problem. Don't solve a problem that 16 other companies have already solved and turned into commodities, and they all sell the stuff for however many bucks a pound. That's not solving a problem.
So can you give me an example? Because like there are, I both agree with that, and I also hold a sort of contrary opinion, which is that you don't need to innovate your way to success. You can take a proven path there. And most of these verticals are so large that even if you're doing something that's similar to other people, there's still a lot of market to share.
Okay, so you're in the merchant services business, right?
Yes.
Okay. Nothing on the surface could be more commoditized than that, right? So this is you're asking the exact right question here, because this is the real issue that you usually get down to. On the surface, merchant service is 100 companies trying to make 3.2% on a credit card transaction instead of 2.8, right?
Yeah, something like that.
On the surface, it's just a bunch of guys with websites and phone calls, grinding away, trying to undercut each other, and then trying to trick the customer. And well, then we're going to inch their rates up and they're never going to notice, and like all this chicanery going on all the time. Okay. But if you go into any industry, even an industry like that, and you have your eyes wide open and you're willing to ask a lot of questions, what you'll find is that people have a huge amount of frustrations. The buyers are not listening to the sellers are not listening to the buyers. Everybody's playing this little shell game. Everybody's trying to take the easy route instead of getting down to the actual real problem. And the actual real problems depending on which customers you're talking about. So as soon as I start niching the market, like, well, what are the industries that have a hard time getting a merchant account? Or what are the industries with a lot of risk? Or what are the industries, like, how is selling merchant services different if I'm talking to a chiropractor than it is if I'm somebody selling industrial motors from China, right? And you start dialing it in, and if you get deep enough into a niche, you're going to find a problem that literally nobody is solving, that if you'll take the time to solve it, you will be the only one. And then you have a captive audience. But walking up and down the street, knocking on doors with a price list is almost never how you sell anything successfully. Unless it happens to be something like, oh, we're 2 weeks into COVID and nobody has masks and you do. Then great, knock on doors with your mask on and your price list, and you'll sell a bunch of stuff.
And don't get too close to them.
Right.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And actually that adds a lot of clarity, which is, said another way, even in what seems to be a very commoditized market, if you break apart the market enough, you're going to get to a whole tremendous number of subsets of problems. And you can just focus on one. And usually that one could still be big enough to create a pretty monster business.
Well, yes, if you will be surprised if you are the first person in a market to solve a problem and you have achieved first mover advantage and you're the only person, you would be surprised how much money you can make even in a very, very, very small market. Yep. Like the number one Vietnamese potbelly pig guy in the whole world probably makes a lot of money.
How many obscure random examples do you have in your pocket that you throw out for marketing tricks?
Oh my word. Like I've had people working on the most minute. Okay. So so like I have a client who he is in the business of, he's a membership website that provides listings of tax foreclosed properties in most of the counties in Pennsylvania, so that real estate investors know what those properties are before they just show up at an auction. And by the way, at those auctions, sometimes they sell an entire house for $1,200.
Yeah.
Because there's only 6 people bidding on it. And most of them don't even want that house. And, there's 2 bidders and one of them bid 1,000, one of them bid 1,200. And there's a million tiny niches. And in fact, one of the things that Google advertising created more than anything else was literally a million nano niches. I knew a guy who had a course called How to Write a Book in 14 days or less. And I did a bunch of keyword research and figured out if he wanted to have another version of that book called How to Write a Children's Book in 14 days or less, he could have owned that market. In fact, you probably still could. There's probably nobody dominating that market. And if I just talking to another guy yesterday. He started a membership website for training basketball coaches how to coach basketball better. And that business is still generating $250,000. I think it might be, something like $250,000 of income a year, 15 years later.
That's awesome.
On how to be a basketball coach. And in fact, the owner is 80 years old and wants to sell the business now. So if you want to find out who it is, get in touch with my office and I'll hook you guys up. These tiny little niches, and some of them you couldn't even make a full-time living off of, but I'll take a website that makes $40,000 a year with hardly any work.
Yes. Sure.
That's a good thing.
All right. So, let me get into some nitty gritty on the segmentation, because I know that you talk about this a lot, but I want to break down at least some of the elements. So as a engineer, statistician, numbers geek, the 80-20 principle is exciting for a lot of reasons, I would imagine. One of them being, I've heard you refer to it as it being a fractal element of Earth, right? Meaning that inside of the 80-20 principle, you'll find other replicas of the 80-20, and then be able to dig down further and find a smaller 80-20, et cetera. Can you explain sort of that notion first? And then I want to dig into kind of how you do the segmentation and how you approach that at specific sizes.
So this is incredibly powerful. It gives you insight on a million things once you understand it. I think it's one of the most useful things. Like my kids understand this. My 12-year-old understands this. And most marketers and salespeople don't. So most people do know at some level that 20% of the people have 80% of the money, and 20% of the real estate is owned by 80% of the people. And then the other 80% is owned by the 20%. And a lot of salespeople know that 20% of your customers buy 80% of your stuff and write 80% of the checks. And that is true. But when I realized that not only does 20% produce 80%, but 20% of the 20% produces 80% of the 80%, and 20 of the 20 of 20 produces 80 of the 80 of the 80, I was like, whoa. Because that means if there's 8 billion people in the world and there's, $100 trillion floating around, there's going to be one Jeff Bezos. Mm-hmm. And if there's 200 countries in a world of 8 billion people, there's going to be one country the size of China. It's almost a law of physics. It means that 1% of your customers could give you as much as 50% of your business. It's really true. And so it means that there's a whole bunch of customers that you should be mostly ignoring. And I'm not saying be apathetic, okay, but you should be selective about, okay, who gets 14 hours of tech support and who doesn't? Mm-hmm. Okay? Who do you bend over backwards to please and who do you not? Most companies have some guy named Dimitri who calls them up like every 2 weeks and wants hours of tech support, and he only spends $2,500 a year. Okay. And then most companies have some other client who sends in a $600,000 purchase order on a fax machine once every 2 years, and nobody has any idea who these people are. They've never been to see them. They've never called them on the phone. They don't know their name, right? And they're not a squeaky wheel, so they don't pay any attention to them. Meanwhile, Dimitri just chewed up 27 hours of some software guy's tech support time. When the company that's sending in the fax every 2 years, if somebody would fly to Oklahoma and meet with those people, they might find out that they have 16 other factories and they could buy a whole bunch of stuff. And so usually the amount of time that we're spending on customers has very little correlation to the amount of money that we actually make from them. And that some of those people are chewing up inordinate amounts of wasted time. And so it also means there are huge levers. So when I wrote the Google Ads book, which is now in its 6th edition, what I really did was I just applied 80-20 to Google Ads. And the entire book is really about, what it really boils down to is you've got all these columns and all these spreadsheets and all these menus and all of these features, and only 10% of it matters. And you can ignore the other 90%, or maybe even shut it off. And you should probably delete or eliminate the bottom 10 or 20% right off the bat. And you focus 90% of your effort on 5% of your Google account. And that's where all of the money is made. And there's certain things that you just watch like a hawk. And there's certain numbers that you absolutely positively need to know. And if you know all that, the thing can run like a lead sled and it can make you money for years. And it also means that the amount of time that you need to spend maintaining your account, you could spend 2 hours a week just sort of wasting your time, or you could spend 2 hours a week being incredibly productive and making it better and better and better and better, and eventually wiping out most of your competition. So really all I did was took the 80-20 principle and apply it to Google. And then we did a Facebook book, and then we did it there. And then we did a TikTok book. The TikTok book probably has 3 chapters about 80-20. Because 80-20 is how it all really works. It will completely change your life. The first time I really understood 80-20, my brain melted. I'm like, how did I not see this my whole entire life? And if you go read the testimonials of the book, people will say this over and over, like, oh my word, I never saw this before. Suddenly I see it. I can't unsee it. 80-20 is flipping everywhere.
So tell me, first of all, for a plug for the TikTok book, when did the TikTok book come out? It's 2022 right now. And TikTok over the last few years has been, probably 2-3 years, has been crazy.
It came out 2 months ago.
Okay.
So it's brand new,
super relevant. Yeah. Perfect.
Yes.
So from an advertising perspective, that makes total sense, right? If you're looking at how to drill into, to me, it makes total sense, how to drill into what ads are working, what doesn't, quickly eliminate the stuff that's not, and quickly keep iterating towards the stuff that's actually performing and spend time there. From a, let's call it a lead generation perspective, how do you apply the 80-20 principle in general? And is it, you gave one example of sort of a quiz funnel with the book, right? Which is let's let them self-select out. Is that always your methodology with marketing, or once you get somebody to a page, how do you sort from there?
Well, let me tell you a story. It's my favorite 80-20 story. So my friend John Paul Mendoza, when he was 17, he dropped out of high school in Denver, hitchhiked to Las Vegas, and became a professional gambler with a fake ID and the whole 9 yards. And so he is living by his wits in Las Vegas, playing poker for a living. And after a few weeks of this, he's like, dang, this was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. And so he went to a gambling bookstore and he bumped into this guy named Rob. And he finds out that Rob runs a professional gambling ring. Well, Rob, do you think you could teach me how to play better poker? Well, for a percentage of your winnings, I could teach you how to play better poker. And so they shake on it. Jump in the Jeep, John. We're going for a ride. So he gets in the Jeep and they're going down the highway. And John says, so Rob, how do I win more poker games? And Rob goes, you have to play people who are going to lose. You need the guy who's 18 years old and just came here from Wichita with $5,000 of his grandmother's inheritance money. And he's going to lost wages. Like, you need that guy. You don't play with other professional gamblers. You play with that guy. And those people are called marks. And he said, well, where do I find marks? And he says, here, I'll show you. And he pulls into a parking lot, and they go into a strip club, and they sit down, and there's women and music and people drinking and noise and commotion. And Rob sat John down at a table, and he pulled a sawed-off shotgun out of his jacket, true story. And he opens the shotgun under the table, and he slams it shut, and it goes, and in the middle of this loud club with lots of distractions, some biker dudes over in the corner like, hey, who made that noise? And the owner of the club comes over to their table, and he goes, hey, what's going on over here? It's all right. Just teaching the lad a lesson. Not going to cause any trouble. Hey, John, did you see those biker dudes turn around when they heard that noise? He's like, yeah. Don't play poker with them because they're not marks. Play poker with everybody else. And that is what I call racking the shotgun. That Facebook quiz is racking the shotgun. Somebody typing in Lafayette, Indiana plumber is racking the shotgun. Somebody clicking on an ad is racking the shotgun. Somebody signing up for your webinar is racking the shotgun. Somebody attending your webinar is racking, and so on and so on and so on. And what you're looking for is either you rack the shotgun or somebody else does, but you're not dealing with everybody. If you want marks, you filter out the biker guys. If you want to be in a biker gang, you filter out the marks and you go hang with the biker guys, right? Like, depending on what your filter is. But everything in marketing is some kind of an elimination process. So many times when people are being sifted and sorted through a sales funnel, I will start with an if. If you are an e-commerce company doing more than $1 million a year and you're paying more than 3.5% on your merchant fees, then it could be that you could get it down to 2.5%. But like, there's probably a qualifier. And I generally, and this is not an absolute rule, but whenever I can, I try to start with, I don't know if I can help you, but if I can find out a little more, I will know for sure. And I'm not going to try to sell you something if I can't help you. In fact, I take it even further. I call it the if then else guarantee. And it's like, if you're an e-commerce company, you're doing more than a certain amount of money. And if you, and Brad, you would have to help me to make a perfect example. And if you fit within certain parameters of our intake system and you cooperate with our process, like usually when you sell a customer something, there's something they've got to do. They've got to use your product a certain way. The card has to be present at the transaction or this or that, the other thing. And you say, if you're the right person and if you meet our criteria and cooperate with our process, then I guarantee you a result. Like, I guarantee you a certain rate, or I guarantee you that you will not get your merchant account canceled. Like, you tell them the criteria. If you check these boxes and you only bring these kind of transactions, I guarantee you that your merchant account will not get revoked. And if it does, then I will pay Brad, will pay the switchover fees for you to get hooked up with somebody else. And the point is that they know that if you don't keep your promise, you're going to be in pain. Therefore, you have skin in the game.
Yeah.
What I just described is almost always the best way to get to your actual unique selling proposition of anything I know.
And basically,
so basically
what I heard there, if I can recap, is And we're excluding the traffic portion of this, right? So you get people to, let's say, a landing page through whatever mechanism, and that's its own process. But get somebody to the landing page, and once you're there, you are again having language that is self-selecting. So you say, hey, if this is you, and right there you're screening people out and saying, hey, look, if this isn't you, go away. So if this is you, and then conditional statement, and you do X, Y, Z, I may be able to help you, and this might be a great thing for you. And in fact, or I'm guaranteeing that I can help you if these things are true. And it's such a big thing that I'm putting this, shock and awe guarantee with it. And that's right. What ropes them in.
Okay. So I had this $5,000 training program, and we said, if your ad spend is above a certain amount every month already, and if you're already selling a product, so you can't be a parked car, if you do the homework assignments during these 12 weeks, you will triple your $5,000 investment in return on ad spend, or else we will pay you all of your money back and give you $1,000 on top of what you paid us. So we'll pay you $6,000 back. And this meant that we were rejecting people from the program whom we could not meet the guarantee. Now, then there was another discovery that happened, which was people would say, okay, but I need this training and I believe you. So even though my spend is below a certain amount, I'm not selling enough yet. Will you take me if I waive the guarantee? And we would take them. And it wasn't like we were trying to manipulate them into, us not bearing any risk. It's just, I need people to know, if you're not an ideal customer and your situation is not ideal and you're not likely to get as good of a result as somebody else, I want you to know that. And if you'll still write the check knowing that, and what that resulted in was more compliant customers. They had a little more humility. Some people, when they come to get trained, they're like, oh, I'm smarter than everybody in the room. I'm too cool for school. I don't know if these people are legit. When you teach somebody something, you got to have some authority. Yep. And that helps.
I love that. Well, and functionally, in sales, you would look at that as a takeaway, right? That's a takeaway close. And so somebody says, actually, the best time to do a takeaway is when somebody gets uppity in the sales process. And this is true of marketing also, right? They show up and they say, in merchant services, what happens is you get sort of a seasoned business person and they state things as fact and nope, this is how things are, yada, yada. And if I'm on those calls, I give sort of a, well, that's not actually how this works. And then, reestablish actually how the industry works or whatever. And I say, but, we work with a lot of people in your space and it's totally understandable why you'd feel that way. And then keep going. But what that does is it repositions and says, I actually don't care about your business here. Like, no disrespect, but I'm not trying to sell you the business. I'm just letting you know that that's not actually how this process works. And if you're still interested, here it is, right? But there's a parallel there in sales and marketing.
Sales and marketing are really about finding proper matches. I believe that sales and marketing is the art and science of helping people who need each other find each other. Okay, so who actually needs to buy from this vendor? And which vendor does this customer really need to be buying from? And if there's an unmet need in the marketplace, what do you need to invent, create, duct tape together, or whatever, so that somebody has less problems today than they had yesterday? That's what it's really about. It's not about ramming people stuff down their throat. It's not about clickbait headlines that manipulate people into doing stuff that they really want to do. One of my mentors who died a few years ago, he was a NLP master practitioner, and he had this great saying. He said, "People eventually come out of those trances." And he was talking about salespeople who learn hypnotic techniques to persuade people to do stuff that frankly they shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, no, I love that. And one of the things that you'll see in marketing for sure, I actually literally used the line yesterday. We were talking about products that end up being risky, quote unquote, risky to credit card processors. And I listed some obvious ones, right? Marijuana, CBD, and then I went on to say, like any product that marketers think is hot and then they get their hands on, because marketers fuck up everything. And the fact of the matter is marketers get good, and there are just nonsense ways to do this with like clickbait, but marketers that are very good can oversell. And so can really good salespeople. But what you just said is spot on, which is the trance wears off. And if you oversold in our world in processing, that's when you end up with chargebacks, disputes. And if you don't end up with that, you end up with unhappy customers, bad reputation, and an unsustainable business model.
Yes. In fact, you know what, that reminds me of John Carlton said years ago. Now he teaches copywriting. He said, if you don't have a 5 to 7% refund rate, you're not selling hard enough. Now that's a criteria for doing a really good job of selling hard. That's what he's trying to describe. Now, my refund is way lower than that because I try to disqualify, and I don't want to sell to anybody that I think our refund rate's probably 1% or 1.5% or something like that. But I'm just illustrating by this part of the conversation that there's a range, and there are times when you need to sell really hard, you need to break some eggs, and you just do whatever you need to do. But I think most of the time you should have a pretty high customer satisfaction rate. I think that the time when you're justified in having a high refund rate is when you're doing something new and cutting edge and exploratory, and not everybody can be perfect, and not every industry has got itself sorted out.
That's the other thing is the industry and product are highly relevant when we talk about refunds, right? If you're selling information products and you have a 4, 5, 6, 10% refund rate, okay. If you have a coffee shop and you have a 10% refund rate, we have a big fucking problem.
Absolutely.
Right? You need to shut that shit down.
Right. Because info products isn't inherently, everybody's taking a risk.
It's subjective in quality, right? So the information is fundamentally subjective. If you teach me marketing, I've got a lot to learn that I would benefit from, but it's a totally different amount than an 18-year-old kid that doesn't know anything about marketing, right? And so we see that all the time is what is the promise that's being put out there to the end customer? And that dictates the expectation.
Exactly. So there's a lot of matching that needs to happen. And I think there a lot of things that get categorized as sales and marketing and closing problems are usually problems with the offer or problems of matching to the customer in the first place, or targeting the wrong customer, pounding square pegs into round holes. And that's what I'm all about. I think if you solve those problems, a lot of products, they sell themselves as long as you got a good story.
Yeah, I love that. Well, years ago, you added some clarity to this that I really like. Years ago, I heard Ryan Dice say, people come up to me and they tell me that they have a traffic problem. You don't have a traffic problem, just go to the traffic store and buy traffic, being Google and Facebook. He said, you have an offer problem. You have a shitty offer. You need to fix what you're selling. The clarity that you just added also was it's not just the traffic and the offer, but it's also matching the two things to make sure that once people see the offer, they can self-select out of it and realize that it's not the right offer for them, if it's not. Mm-hmm. And I love that. I think that's great, man. Well, I know we're coming up on time. You have a bunch of books that people can check out. So I actually want to check out the TikTok book because that's really timely at the moment. And you've updated the Google one, and you've got a Facebook book on ads, and then 80/20. Where do you want to point people? Where do people find out more about you?
If I had to pick one thing that people should do, buy 80/20 sales and marketing. You can go to sell8020.com. And instead of paying $17 on Amazon, you pay $7, including shipping, in the United States, and we'll ship it to you. And we'll give you some videos that aren't included. on Amazon, and it'll totally revolutionize your life. It's got about 800 reviews on Amazon. You can go take a look at our sales page. People rave about this book. It'll change your whole perspective on even what sales and marketing is. And I think it'll greatly benefit your life. So sell8020.com.
I love it, man. I appreciate you carving out some time today.
I appreciate you having me on, and I appreciate the Mohawk merchant people. What a great, what a memorable, great, unique image. Thank you.
Absolutely, man. We'll talk soon.
If you learned one thing on this episode, share it with another entrepreneur. They need to hear it. Also subscribe so that new episodes just show up on your phone. It's a lot easier that way. And if you want the really good stuff, check out our free BAM! Tactics and Strategies course. It's where we curate the best tips, tricks, and tools that our guests know, whether they've shared them on the podcast or not. Just go to beyondamill.com. You'll also find previous episodes and show notes at beyondamill.com.